wish I could have heard some of those conversations. I bet they were good. Anybody able to solve that one real quick? If so, you're probably way ahead of the rest of us. I've heard answers from both ends of the spectrum when it comes to how far is too far. I had friends who figured, hey, as long as it's not literal sex, we're good. And I've heard other people claim, oh, you shouldn't even kiss until you're married. That's the only right choice. And what about beyond the actual physical side of dating? You got questions like, is it okay to say I love you to every person you date? Is flirting a big deal? Can I be talking to more than one person at a time? Who cares if I break up with somebody via text message? If they're okay sending me that picture, what difference does it make? Dating, it's complicated. But the great news is that God didn't just say, hey, enjoy sex inside of a marriage relationship and otherwise good luck figuring it out. He actually had a lot to say about the best way to handle relationships as well. Now, if you're someone who hasn't made a decision yet to follow God and you don't yet have a relationship with Jesus, I'll just let you know, you're off the hook for all this stuff, okay? What God says about love, sex, and dating, it's true for everyone. It'll work for everyone, but you don't have to follow it. Following his design is the best way to have a better life, period. But the guide that God gives is for people who say they follow him. In other words, if you're a Jesus follower, this stuff isn't optional for us. So to find the answers we're all looking for, we need to start with a little historical context. The Old Testament, maybe you've heard of that. The Old Testament is a collection of documents in the Bible that were written before Jesus was born. It starts with the beginning of creation and then primarily records how God interacted with and how he related to the Jewish people throughout history. It's a record of how God moved and proved his love for people. Now, if you read those Old Testament documents, you're going to notice there are a lot of rules. Now, you got the famous ones, the 10 Commandments, but altogether, God gave the Jewish people 613 rules to follow. That seems crazy, doesn't it? But there was a loving reason for all the rules. When God brought the Jewish people out of Egypt, they'd been in slavery for 400 years. So they didn't know how to treat one another. They didn't know how to function as a healthy community and nation. These people hadn't had the freedom to do any of that. And when they looked around, there were no good examples. This is really hard for us to imagine, but nobody in the world at that time valued things like kindness or generosity or mercy or forgiveness or love. People just didn't live that way back then. Instead, people did what was selfishly best for them. But that sin, well, it was ruining their lives. You remember what sin is? It's doing anything that is unloving towards God or towards other people. And God knows that when we sin, well, stuff breaks. Breaks our relationship with God, breaks our relationship with people. So since people had broken the world with sin, God needed to show them how to treat one another again. That's what so much of the Old Testament is about. You can think of it kind of like a baby. A baby isn't born knowing how to bathe themselves or feed themselves. They don't know you can't hit someone or you can't grab a cat by the tail. They don't know you can't touch the stove and not get burned. They don't understand that if they run in front of a car, they might get hit. Parents have to teach them all that. Well, in the same way, God couldn't just come in and say, hey, be kind to everybody, please, because they had no concept of what kind was. Nobody was kind. So God gave them these 613 rules to teach them how to live a better life. But when Jesus showed up, he simplified everything, which is a really good thing because none of us want to have to remember 613 things, do we? So Jesus gave us one rule, and he said it's the only rule we needed. Matter of fact, this rule answers our question, well, how far is too far? And it answers every other dating question you'll ever have. You ready to hear it? Okay, here we go. John 13:34, Jesus said, I give you a new command. In other words, you used to have 613 commands and laws that you had to follow. I'm going to push them all to the side and replace it with just one. And here it is. Love one another. He said, you must love one another just as I have loved you. Now, before you get too excited thinking, oh, perfect, everything I'm wanting to do in my dating relationship is love. No, hang on. We got to pay attention to the standard of love that Jesus gave us. He said we should love one another how? Just as Jesus loves us. So that brings up the question, well, how does Jesus love us? Well, he gave up everything, literally, to love us. He gave up his preferences. He gave up his rights. He gave up his wants. He gave up his desires for us. And he even gave his life. So this commandment to love one another as Jesus loves us is actually setting the standard really high. His love's never selfish, is it? It's never for his own benefit. It's never about getting what he wants. His love never hurts us. His love for us never leads us to do anything that isn't best for our future. His love never causes regrets. His love always has our long-term best interest in mind. Now, imagine if in every dating relationship, both people treated one another like Jesus would. How would dating look different? See, the question isn't how far is too far. The question is, what's a loving thing to do? So in a second, we're going to talk about what this looks like practically, but I want to give you a shot at it first, okay? Think about how differently dating would look if both people treated each other like Jesus treats us. How would doing what love requires of you change the way you dated? How does that change your mental image of what it looks like to date? I want you to talk about that with your group, then I'll be back in just a second.